Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with the one and only Mac King. Mac is amazing. He is hilarious. He is a legend. He's been performing at Harrah's in Vegas for 20 years, and this episode was awesome. We spoke about his journey. We spoke about what it's like, performing family show, how you can have funny comedy magic. We spoke about performing at comedy clubs while comedy clubs were exploding. It was an awesome conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with all of you. Here it is, a wonderful conversation with a comedy magic legend, Mac King. I'm sure you've heard the question before, but how did you get started in magic? How did this bug kind of catch you?
I don't remember the first time I actually did a trick. I remember the first trick I ever saw was my grandfather. Magicians use that like as a plot device all the time for their, my grandpa. But it was really true for me. Both my grandfathers did a couple of magic tricks growing up. And the first one I remember seeing was my dad's father, Pax King. And I remember him picking me up and sitting me on his kitchen counter. And this is how long ago it was. I mean, he could pick me up and sit me on his kitchen counter. I was like 5 years old, maybe. And I remember sitting on this counter, and he reached over, and this is also how long ago it was. There were matches to light the stove, right?
What a sentence that is,
right? Right, exactly. So I called him Pa. Pa reached over, picked up a match, wrapped it up in a handkerchief, gave it to me. I felt it. I broke it, heard it break, felt it break. He opened up the thing, and my little 5-year-old head was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I was a very early cursor.
That makes sense.
And so I remember seeing him do that. And then my other grandfather, my mom's dad, actually had some magic books at his house. I never saw my other grandpa Pax, never saw him do another trick ever. But my mom's dad had like a Henry Hay book and an Alexander Herman book and a Walter Gibson book. And I still have some of these, a Martin Gardner book. So I remember him doing tricks for me. And I would, once I realized that grandpas weren't just magic, I'd say, teach me how to do that. Teach me how to do that. And he would say, well, the secret's in one of those books. And so now I'm spending my visits pouring through these books, trying to figure out the trick and it was just, that was such a great, I look back on that thankfully, because if he had just said, here's how it works, great, I would have learned a trick. But because I was pouring through these books and reading, going, oh no, that's not it. But wow, that is cool. Water out of a coconut shell, tricks that I would never, ever do. But I learned a lot about magic, at a very early age, reading through those books, pouring through them, trying to figure out the trick he'd showed me. So grateful for that. And also he would have me do like little, once I started doing little tricks, my grandparents would invite their neighbor friends over and sit them in their living room, and I would stand in a little archway into the dining room and do my little magic show for them. And it was great. They were just always really encouraging.
It's awesome. I was in a similar situation. Like my uncle, did magic in that way for me. And I've heard the story similarly, but a lot of times, like it just does, like an age has to do with it. The opportunity to be able to get into it so young and perform so young, just gets the ball rolling. And the next thing that I'm really interested in is about entering the world of magic. I think that we all kind of learn about magic from whoever that person is. Maybe it's an uncle, maybe it's a friend, whatever it is. And then we find out about, the real world of magic, whether it's, like books, or whether it's like the IBM or a convention or something else like that. Was there a moment like that for you that really kind of opened you up to the world of magic that existed out there?
So when I was little, we would get Easter baskets, even when I was old enough not to know that there was my parents were the Easter Bunny. And one year in that Easter basket were a small set of atoms, or I don't know, but anyway, a small set of linking rings and a packet card trick, like a 4 ace trick, and a penny block. Those 3 tricks. And I was like, holy shit. And, I didn't have any store-bought magic tricks at all. And
Yeah.
my dad had gotten those. And it turns out there was a little magic counter in a store in downtown Louisville. We didn't live in downtown, but 30 minutes from our house in the middle of downtown, there was this store called Caulfield's Novelties, and they had a little corner with a couple of cabinets of magic counters. And my dad had gone in there on a whim and came out with these magic tricks. And so, a few days later, I got, conned him into taking me down there. And I remember buying the Sure Shot die box and a vanishing wand with a paper shell and an egg bag. Those were the 3 tricks that I bought. So I was probably like 8, 10 years old, somewhere in there. And, so this was the first magician, that I, professional, the guy behind the magic counter, first magician other than my grandpa's that I'd ever met in my life. And so I was excited about that. But it was a pretty good drive. And, we didn't have money. I didn't have money to spend on magic tricks. So it was a big deal to be able to get to spend that little bit of money on those tricks. And I didn't get back down there. We moved then to a different part of town that was closer. I went more. And when I was 14, the guy behind the counter said, when you're 14, you can come to the Magic Club meeting. There's a magic club? And
there's more of you?
Yeah, there's more, and for me, it was like, there are more of us. Cause I'm, shit, I'm a magician. Yeah. I go to the magic shop and, and this guy had steered me to a couple of books and I bought some more tricks. And so the first time I went to this magic club, this is just crazy now. It's just such my mom just took me downtown. We met at the YWCA, the Magic Club did, in the basement, and a kind of a little bit of a shady part of town in downtown Louisville. And my mom, I was 14, and she just pulls up to the corner and drops me off and says, call me.
Be home by 7 or something.
Yeah, call me. Find a payphone, and that's what you had to do to make a call, right? So
wild.
Yeah. And so I just went in there, and she was like dropping me off in the corner of town to meet with a bunch of old men in the basement of the YWCA. Pretty shaky. And but it was amazing because I remember distinctly, I walked down these stairs, turned to the right, room. I'd go in, and there's this crowd of people watching somebody, crowded around. You can tell they're watching somebody do a magic trick. And so I can't really, I'm trying to see what's going on. And, they applaud, and then they this was before the official start of the meeting, right? So somebody had just been doing a trick, and then the crowd kind of disperses and starts to go to the folding chairs. And I see that the guy that they're watching is a kid my age. And I'm like, oh my God. Everybody else, seemed like they were 150 years old, right? All these other guys there at the club. Yeah. And so I'm like, who's this guy? And that guy turned out to be Lance Burton. So we were both 14 years old at the Magic Club, and because he had known his mom worked at a company called Frito-Lay, made the chips. Frito-Lay had a magician on staff who lived there in Louisville, a guy named Harry Collins, who I had actually seen, but I didn't know he was from Louisville. He had come to my elementary school and done a show. I'm guessing I went up to him afterwards and said, "Hey, I'm a magician too." "Oh, nice to meet you, Sonny." And but Lance had sort of gotten grandfathered into this club, so he'd already been coming for a year or more. Even though he wasn't officially old enough to come to the club, so they all knew who he was, and he was already I mean, this is weird to say, but he was already the best magician at the Magic Club. And
I believe it.
so it was cool to get to, and so then he and I became buddies, and that was our little magic community, for a while, and then once we were old enough to drive, he got a car when he was 16, and we lived pretty far apart, 20 miles or more. But once he had a car, then he would come over to my house and we would hang out.
Talk to me a little bit more about, and by the way, I love that. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that, in their magic journeys. Sometimes it's just one or two or three people who you get to, fall in love with magic with. You get to really enjoy magic with and enjoy, what somebody else has learned. So I think I definitely resonate with that journey. I'd love to hear more about kind of the relationship that you two had going forward, because I know that you performed together, and I know that, in a lot of like years that actually formed the material in your acts, you were doing it, together. What was that like? It seems like, having somebody who can always be working on your act with you a lot of the time.
Oh my God. It makes a huge difference. I mean, I would recommend that, that anybody who can, have their best friend be Lance Burton. I think that's really handy. But I mean, like I said, when we started hanging out, and then, if he would get a show, or if I'd get a show, we would, bring each other to the show. And I mean, I've seen him, the first time I went over to his house, he had like this whole stage set up in the basement of his house, these backdrops that his mom had gotten him and made the curtains for. And he did his little act for me. And he, Harry Collins had sort of taken him under his wing, and Harry had doves and did dove magic and taught Lance some bird steals. And Lance, worked on these, and holy shit, it was just so far above what I was doing. Yeah. And then but I've seen him set up that, put a light on the floor and set that backdrop up in somebody's living room and do, what you think of as Lance Burton's dove act, his manipulation act in somebody's house. We would do our show everywhere. One of the things that we did, that I think is still useful and could be done today, once we, like I said, had transportation, he and I would go to dinner someplace, just to a restaurant, TGI Fridays or someplace that, that we could afford. And we'd have dinner, but before the check would come, I would walk over to a stranger's table and say, see my friend over there? Point at Lance sitting at the table across the way. Say, he bet me $5 that you wouldn't sit through 3 magic tricks. And we looked completely harmless. Mm. They could see we were already in the restaurant, and polite young man, and so nobody said no, right? So I would do my 3 little tricks for them, and then Lance would walk over, believe it or not, carrying a vanishing bird cage in the restaurant. Oh, he'd walk over this little bird cage, and I'd say, "Pay up," and he would go, boom, make the cage disappear. Then reach in his pocket, hand me $5.
Oh my goodness.
And then he would do a trick for them. And then, somebody across the way would say, "Hey, show me that trick. Do that," and either we would get kicked out, or sometimes we'd get dessert bought for us. Sometimes people would pick up our check. It was just a way to get in front of people doing magic tricks for strangers. Mm-hmm. So we started doing little shows together. And then when we were 17, 18, can't remember exactly. I'm bad about that. But I was working in a restaurant. I had gotten a job doing close-up magic in this restaurant. And but also I would go in during the day. I was kind of trying to learn to be a chef too. I was interested in that. Mm. And I got a call at the restaurant, hey, I guess it's for you. So they want him to talk to the magician. And so I go to this phone call, and it's this guy, Rick Stevens, and he says, hey, I'm Rick Stevens. I have this theme park down in Cumberland Falls, Kentucky, and I'm looking for a magician. And are you the magician who worked at Max and Irma's? Max and Irma's was a, sort of a TGI Fridays kind of place. And right. I'd done close up there, walk around, and
working or as one of your
no this was a paid thing. Okay. Yeah, this was a paid thing. Stunts. Yeah, not one of those stunts, although
not a dessert stunt.
It's possible that I got that job because of that, but I don't think so. But I'd only done a couple of days there. It was for a special promotion or something. And so I said, yeah, that's me. Well, can you come down tomorrow and audition? Well, can I bring my friend? I don't give a damn who you bring. If you come tomorrow, that'd be great. So he and I pack up the next morning. It's like 2-hour drive down to this place. We go do our little magic show. And he says, hey, if you guys can start on Sunday, there's an extra $100 bill in it for each of them. Oh my God, we have struck it rich. So we started there that Sunday, and we were 3 shows a day, 7 days a week. And then we lived right in like a 2-bedroom house trailer that was behind they called it the saloon, but it was just a concrete floor with tables and chairs and a hamburger stand at one end. They called it the saloon because it was this Western themed town. But we were done with our shows by like 6 or 7 at night, but we had access to that little theater afterwards. And so, we'd go in, work on our acts, and like you said, have somebody there to watch it and critique it. And it's just invaluable. And it wasn't until, I don't know, pretty recently when I was talking to the guy who hired me. He was in Las Vegas here. The guy who hired me there at Tombstone. It was a giant error. He had been this guy who was a magician, guy named Jerry Burgess, was the only magician near this theme park, but he was a doctor. He just was an amateur, hobbyist magician, but he was the doctor in this little town. And so this guy, Rick, who owned Tombstone Junction, went to him for his magic recommendations. And he says, hey, there's a guy, pretty good guy, I think, at Max and Irma's. Well, what he didn't know was that there was a Max and Irma's in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I had done a couple of shows, but there's one in Lexington, Kentucky, 80 miles away. Yeah. And this guy named Mark Comley worked there. And Mark worked like every week. Mark was a regular, two nights a week or something, for years he had been there. And so that job should have been Mark Comley's, but Lance and I got it. And I feel like, if he'd called the other Max and Irma's, Mark Comley would have had his own show in Las Vegas.
Who knows? But first of all, it sounds like an amazing journey to not only be doing 3 shows a day, but also to be doing them with somebody who can watch them with you and go through it and give you like notes and get notes back and forth. And like you joked before, having that person be Lance Burton.
I think if you ask Lance, he would say, to me, it's the opposite, really. Lance Burton, to me, is the greatest magician of my generation. I think it's because of my coaching.
I'm doing this all wrong. Oh my goodness. Let me ask, what percentage of the Mac King that we know today was formed in that period? Like when by the time that run basically was done, like how much did that do for your character development? How much did that turn you into who you are today? Or is that one of many things? Like a lot of times,
I think it's one of many things, but I think it's the main thing, really. Lance and I worked there 3 years together. I was still in college at that point. I continued in college. Lance moved to LA, got on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and his career, and then a few months later, he was in Las Vegas. It's crazy. But he was really ready. His act was, like I said, he was already the best magician in America, I think. But I worked 2 more years by myself there. So our act, when we did it together, our act was Lance would come out and do his bird act. And that's where that bird act really developed. I mean, lots of stuff, like if you look at the first Tonight Show appearance from Lance, you can see that on YouTube. There's a street sign that the birds land on. And that's a street sign that we cut down, that cut off the top of a pole illegally, and mounted it on one of my hat rack that my mom had that we stole from my house, or asked my mom if we could have. And so, I mean, that was all put together at Tombstone. That those birds flying up to that sign. So our act was that. Then I would do the rope trick, which I've gone through various methods for that, but so my act at that time was basically the rope trick and the burnt bill routine. And my act still, although those things have changed dramatically since, in the past 40 years, it still opens with the rope trick, closes with the bill trick.
Right.
And Lance's act still, when he was working, opened with the bird act, and then closed with a variation of an illusion that we did to close our show down there.
Wow.
So we called it Godzilla versus Zorro. And it was a guy dressed like Zorro with a sword, and involved a card sword trick and a exchange illusion with a guy wearing another one of he would put on the Godzilla suit and I would put on the Zorro thing, and we'd do the card sword, and then one of us would disappear and appear in the back of the room, and the other was in the other person's costume. And so that's kind of how he closed his show in Las Vegas.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's from when we were 20. But I mean, I've been really lucky. I've always managed to find some place, so when I stopped doing those shows at Tombstone, then comedy clubs started sprouting up around the country. I mean, before the early 80s, there was New York, Chicago, and LA, at least in the States, and nothing else. And so these bar owners started realizing, hey, I can pay comics less than a band. All I need is a mic and a light and I did shows on, a sheet of plywood on concrete blocks with a light bulb and a coffee can hanging from the ceiling, and a shitty mic that the stand wouldn't stay up, or held on there with a coat hanger. But I mean, I was doing it wasn't 21 shows a week at that point, but it was 6 to 10, and still that's a lot. And and even at that point, like, cruise ships started calling me, and I'm like, I'm not interested, because, 1, maybe 2 shows a week was all they had. And it was more money than I was making at that time, but it was way less shows.
And one thing that I can assume is not to even question about the other talent that was around at that time, but I can imagine that almost nobody else, when the comedy club circuit was popping up, had the kind of experience that you had going in there. So I imagine you very quickly were, running, headlining all the shows, and I assume that wasn't
right. I mean, I was lucky in that, because of exactly what you say is true. Because the structure in those clubs was an opening act doing 15 minutes, and then a middle act doing 30 minutes or so, and then a headliner doing 45 to an hour. And I didn't burst in as a headliner, but I did start I didn't have to become an opening act. I started as a middle act in those clubs, because I already had my shows at Tombstone were 30 minutes.
Right.
And so I already had a pretty, strong 30-minute act. So, and it was a great learning experience too. I mean, not only did I do my act every night, but I also got to sit in the back after I was done and watch the headliner, and watch how they structured their acts, and sort of like having another Lance Burton as a roommate. A lot of those clubs, you'd stay in like a condo, with the headliner. The middle act and the headliner would share like a 2-bedroom condo. And so I got to watch how they structured their act, but not just that, but how they worked on their act during the day when they weren't doing a show that night, so they're listening, these guys that are really good, are listening every night or every day to this night before set,
Right.
and making tiny little changes, a word here, a phrase there, or this bit instead before that bit, rearranging the structure of their act. And every day it's a little bit different, and either a little bit better, or by the end of the week it's certainly better. And those guys were growing, and it was great for me to be able to see the work ethic that they had. And I really, at that point, really tried really hard to do nothing that would differentiate me from those straight comics, right?
Right.
Even though I was using props and doing magic tricks, those guys, for the most part, really look down on you as a magician and a prop comic. And so I think because I wanted to be accepted by them too, I wasn't doing stock lines, and I was doing tricks that no one else was doing, tricks that I had come up with, or presentations certainly that I'd come up with, and making it, I wanted them to understand that I had a comics outlook to this magic show.
Right.
And that was really great for me too. And at one point, my goal was to be the highest paid middle act in America. And so I don't know whether that ever happened, but that was a goal I'd set for myself. And then the other goal was to be asked, because I knew from experience and hearing the club managers talk that, a lot of middle acts in those clubs were, pestering them to move me up. I'm ready to headline. Move me up.
Right.
And my goal was to never ask for that, but to be so strong that they had to ask me to do that. And so that did eventually happen. It might have happened earlier. I don't know if I'd pestered and pounded it, but it seemed like the right way to handle it, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. It sounds like an amazing, time to be able to perform.
Oh my God, it's crazy.
The comedy club circuit. It sounds crazy. Was there anybody who you were a middle act for, or that you got a chance to see perform with in one of those comedy clubs that was really exciting for you, or what was really special for you?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of early on who I was a middle act for. There was a guy, Mark McCullum, who I really liked. I really liked the way his act was structured. He went on to win Star Search here in the U.S., a TV show contest. It's sort of a America's Got Talent precursor. Trying to think of who else. More striking to me are the number of people who were middle acts for me once I became a headliner, and that went on to far out.
Anybody come to mind?
Eclipse Drew Carey was I worked with Drew a lot. He was a middle act for me a lot. Ron White, also a comic, also middle act for me a lot. We worked together a bunch, and those guys went on to way bigger and better things than I did. So those are the two. But Cedric the Entertainer, also, I kept telling Cedric, no one's you've got to change your name. That's just, you can't be called Cedric the Entertainer. That's ridiculous. So I'm an idiot.
What? Well, who knows? What was the moment that got you to Vegas? It seems like touring comedy clubs and the height of comedy clubs is one of the greatest things to do. What was the moment that got you to actually move to Vegas?
Well, Lance had been here for years and years and years, and my wife and I, we got married in '85, and we moved to Los Angeles in '87. And Lance had already been here for a number of years in the Folie Bergère. So when we lived in LA, he was in the Folie Bergère. And before we moved to Las Vegas, he had opened his own show at the Hacienda Hotel. That was kind of between the Monte Carlo, the big giant hotel, and his like variety spot in the Folie Bergère at the Tropicana that he did for like 9 years. And again, I mean, that's another thing. He went from 21 shows a week at Tombstone Junction to a couple of shows a night at the Body Shop when he moved to LA, and then to 2 shows a night, 7 nights a week for 9 years at the Folie Bergère. I mean, he also just doing show after show after show after show, and that's it's really simple. I mean, you have to do a bunch of shows and be a good listener, and he's really done that. He really is a good listener to the audience and to the voice in his head and to his friends who comment on his act. So getting me to Las Vegas. So we moved to LA. Lance kept saying, you should move to Las Vegas. You should move to Las Vegas. And my wife's a marriage and family therapist, and, they're good buddies too. And he would say, Jennifer, a lot of crazy people in Las Vegas. And, but it just never seemed to be the right, I just didn't think I didn't have the right kind of show. I mean, I wasn't interested in a big production show. I mean, over the years, his show evolved from, this single guide manipulation thing to, assistants and stagehands and, all this stuff. And that wasn't what was interesting to me. I was really interested in one-man show. And I just didn't think that was right for Las Vegas. But there were clubs in Las Vegas. There was an Improv here, and there was a place called the Comedy Stop at the Trop, and a place called Comedy Max at the Maxim, and the Riviera Comedy Club. So there were 4 clubs here in town that I would come in once or twice a year to each one of those. So I would make usually like 6 trips a year into town. And people saw me or whatever, and then I started getting like fill-in spots. Hey, do you want to come to Las Vegas and fill in for the Trained Dog Act in the Rockettes show at the Flamingo, or do you want to come in? And so I started getting those, and then they started. I don't remember this before your time, but there were these World's Greatest Magic TV specials.
Yep.
And so I did the Mac King School of Magic on those,
Mm-hmm.
but also they were all taped at Caesar's Palace here in Las Vegas. And so I hosted those tapings. None of that was on camera. None of that was recorded, but I would come out, but they did have a big live audience in the theater. And so I would come out and talk to the audience, do tricks while they set up for the next performer. So wow. I did that for a couple of years. And so casino executives saw me doing that. And so so that also aided in me getting those, week-long fill-in things. And I started coming. There was a guy named Nick Lewin, who was a comedy magician from England, who lived in the States for years. But Nick had his own show at the Maxim Hotel in the daytime, doing a couple shows a day, 6 days a week. And so I had worked at the nighttime. They had a comedy club in that same room, and I had come in and headlined there. And the manager of that room was like, hey, when Nick takes off, are you interested in coming in to fill in for him? Yeah, I'd do that. So I started filling in for Nick, a week here and a week there or whatever. And they said, we want to up this to 3 months. Nick's been here for a number of years and kind of wants to explore opportunities on the road again a little bit. And so he wants to take more time off. So would you be interested in doing, like a month on and then 3 months off and then a month on and 3 months off and a month? Yeah. So with those 3 months of work, plus the other clubs in town, we decided if we moved to Las Vegas, I could, at least have, 4 or 5 months of work a year at home instead of being on the road. Because when we lived in LA, I was gone 220 days a year doing shows out of town. And so I jumped at that opportunity because and at the encouragement of my wife. She claims she missed me too, so wanted to spend more time with me. So I started filling in for Nick, and then Nick claims that he didn't know this, but Nick left the Maxim, and they offered me a 2-year deal to take over that show. And 2 months into that deal, they announced they were going to close that hotel. We're like, blindsided, because I had just signed this 2-year deal, so I had not taken any work, and those clubs and corporate stuff, and everything, 6 months, 8 months in advance were all those bookings, right? So now I'm like out of work, going to be out of work in 2 months, no bookings. My wife is pregnant at that point. We decided once we moved to Las Vegas to try to have a baby. Wow. My wife got pregnant. I'm out of work, or going to be. But luckily for me, the guy who ran that room at the Maxim was also going to be out of work. And he came to me and said, do you mind would you be interested in me trying to sell this show to another casino? And yes, I would. Be a lifesaver. So, luckily we had 2 more months that we were open, so he could invite people from other casinos to come and see the show, instead of us just showing up in somebody's office with a video or storyboards or whatever about a show that I was going to do for them. They could actually come and see the show, and we could talk immediately afterwards and see what they thought. And so we managed to sell Harrah's on that show. And so I was only off for a few weeks, thankfully. And
wow.
Yeah. So I started that deal like in October at the Maxim, fell apart in the end of November, started it in January at Harrah's. So.
And how many years has it been at Harrah's since?
If you don't count the last year where I didn't do a show, I haven't done a show since March 14th, 2020.
It's the anniversary right now.
Yeah. It's coming right up for my 1-year anniversary of no work. In January 2020, couple of months before the pandemic, that was 20 years. I celebrated 20 years.
Wow.
There. So I started in January 2000.
Wow.
So
it's incredible. It is crazy, and there's so many different aspects of it that are mind blowing. The first thing is, let me just ask, do you miss the kind of comedy club tour or that road life? It is super different, to be like, it almost is like having a full-time job again, right? You wake up, you go to work, you do the show, you go, it is a little different than kind of the randomness of being on tour or things like that.
Yeah, I don't miss calling. I don't miss making calls to clubs, those, and negotiating salary and bookings and all that crap. I mean, that's never something that was fun for me ever. I mean, there are guys that like that, I think, but I'm not one of them. Mm-hmm. But I do miss, being on the road, and I miss the sort of the adrenaline rush. I mean, I still have the rush of a show where something unusual happens or whatever, and I have a good, I have a good time every time. I mean, I really still, after 20 years, love doing my show. Look forward to it almost every day. But there's something different about the challenge of doing it in a comedy club where, when in Las Vegas, people may not know who I am, but they know kind of what they're coming to see. They know they're coming to see a comedy magic show, right? They bought a ticket to see the Mac King comedy magic show. Mm-hmm. So that entails something different than if they buy a ticket because they always have a good time at the Funny Bone in St. Louis, Missouri, right? Just go, we go a couple of times a month to the Funny Bone, and it's always great. So whoever's there is fine. And wait, it's a magic act? Oh, shit. So I miss the sort of the adrenaline rush of, kicking that comedy club ass crowd.
Winning over an audience that maybe
winning over an audience that's not there, they think, to see a dorky guy in a suit doing the rope trick.
It's funny you've referenced this concept of like, your act, and I think that I've in the history of me doing these interviews, there has been a a change, like when I got a chance to interview Johnny Thompson, he was talking about an act, like when I spoke with the amazing Jonathan, he was talking about an act. And now, magicians, it don't seem to be talking about an act as much. They seem to be talking about a show, which is something that is a malleable object that, maybe changes every couple years and changes every now and again. And just, I think you're famous for a lot of the tricks that you do. It's almost like for somebody to go to Vegas to see you is like going to Vegas to see a landmark, in Vegas that is supposed to look, you want to see Matt King do the rope trick. So I'd love to hear a little bit kind of about that. If you can comment on this idea of like classics, doing tricks that people like know that you do for a long time.
Well, I mean, I think that's mostly magicians who feel that way, I think. But it's, for me, it is, I say it's an act, my act instead of my show. I don't know. I mean, I use those more interchangeably, but I guess I've said act more often today.
And yeah, we need to get tripped up on the verbiage.
Yeah. But it is a complete thing. It's not just a collection of tricks in that way, right? So it's got this structure, and that's one of the things like I said, when harking back to those comedy club days, the acts that I liked had a structure with a lot of callbacks, and and it wasn't just a guy starting saying something funny, saying some more funny things, and then saying goodnight.
Right.
The ones I liked, there were references back to earlier parts of the show, and stuff built, and that's what I've really tried to do. So there's a weird arc in the show, right? I mean, in my show, the audience expectations are very low. I do a trick, and it's like, oh, maybe this is going to be okay, and
right.
Each thing builds on the next, and the second thing refers to the first thing, and the third thing refers to the second and the first, and the fourth thing refers to the third, the second, and the first. And some of those, there's lots of things left unresolved. They all get resolved at the end, and everything is tied to everything else in weird little ways. And I think people appreciate that. And the more they see it, the more they appreciate it. So I get a lot of repeat business because people appreciate the way that the thing is structured. But it does make it difficult once I've established. Now I've got like a 65. When I started at Harrah's, my show was like 55 minutes. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I've added things, but I haven't taken anything out. Right. So it's now, I say now, hoping that someday I'll do a show. Now it's like 70 minutes. It's grown to a little,
right.
And I've done as many as, I've gotten in trouble for this, but it's gone longer because of laughs or the, right. stuff that happens that show. It's gone longer than that. And over the years, I've added like 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes of new material to that 55-minute show. But I didn't take any tricks out, but it's caused me to tighten up these things or cut bits of these things out. But because these things are so tied together, if I take out one whole trick, this house of cards collapses. And so it's really hard to take a whole hunk out of that and replace it with another hunk because they're all so interconnected. But it's been good for me because it's forced me to, edit the stuff that I am leaving in when I want to put something new in there. And it also, like you said, people come, it's not just magicians, but lay people too, come in like for some reason, like if I had a trouble before the show with like the fishing pole for the aerial fishing trick. Yeah. And I didn't do that trick, after the show, I'm out in the lobby, hawking t-shirts and posing for pictures and stuff. And if I don't do that, or the cloak of invisibility, those two tricks especially, somebody will say something, not just magicians, but somebody who's been to the show. We get, like I said, a lot of repeat people, and they'll say, I sure missed the fish. I brought my friend to see the fish, and what happened? Oh my God, sorry. And so it's a curse and a blessing.
To comment on that, I think there are currently, I've heard a lot of magicians have more than one show, have more than one act, have more than one. And I think there's a lot of fears of like, for me, even for myself, for example, I perform in Toronto. I host, like I say currently, again, pandemic,
Right. Yeah.
who knows? But like hosting a lot of shows live, and like I do a balloon swallow, and like I have eaten a lot of balloons for the Toronto community, like, and I started thinking to myself, like, at what point do I need to stop doing this balloon swallow for these people that have just seen me eat this balloon, a dozen times? Do you ever feel that about some of the things that you do? How do you feel with those certain aspects?
Well, I've been really lucky, right? Because I'm not just limited to the population of Toronto, right?
Right.
I'm limited to the population of the world that comes to Las Vegas, right? So I think if I were in your position or a position like that, yeah, I would have to change the show more often than I do. So I try to add new stuff every now and again, but I don't ever, I can't imagine ever just writing a new show from scratch.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, I guess, is the concept of, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. It's kind of the concept of like performing for the same different magic for the same people, or the same magic for different people, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's really incredible. I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of the simplicity in props. I think, first of all, when you think of Vegas, you obviously think of, maybe light, big lights, people in costumes and outfits, and even magic in general. There's this thought that magicians need all these different gargantuan things, or needs to produce confetti of sorts, or but whatever, giant objects or anything like that. Talk to me about what you feel about props, because it doesn't seem like you use, elaborate magic props.
No, I don't. I don't want anything to look elaborate, certainly. There's a couple of things that, like, that I've had built that are beyond. Most of my act is like cardboard and elastic and paper clips and, safety pins. But I've had a couple of props built, but that are beyond my technical ability to make something. But those things, like, for instance, there's an oatmeal can that produces a guinea pig. And so it's way more complicated than I could possibly make. And it's not just it's not the first part is just the chop cup that I made myself, but the guinea pig part is beyond me. But it doesn't look like a magic prop, right? It doesn't look like a cylinder that's, with a star on it and chrome. Right. It looks like a cardboard oatmeal tub. So I just think that makes it more disarming. And I think it's, the guys that are really, really, really successful with giant illusions, there are only a few, I think. There are a lot of guys doing those shows, but there are only a few who can really, in my mind, pull it off, because it's really hard to figure out how to make the audience believe that you had anything to do with the trick that happened, right? And so if it's a smaller sleight of hand trick, I think it's a little easier for the audience to make the assumption that you had, if the card disappears from the deck and appears in my fly, I guess they could think it's a trick deck or a trick suit or whatever. But I think their first way is, how did he do that?
Right.
And when you float somebody in the air, I think the first thought is, what kind of contraption does that guy have?
Right.
To make a body float in the air? Then I can't see the method, the mechanism. And so, that's just it's sort of, there's a little ego at the bottom of that, right? Where it's like, I want the credit. Mm-hmm. But also that's what interests me, right? So it's not that I
think those guys are bad and I'm better, or bad and I'm better, or vice versa. I'm doing what I really love, which is sleight of hand magic combined with comedy. Those two things really interest me, and having big props doesn't interest me. And I also, I'm a guy from Kentucky, and having, fancy props doesn't fit that, right? I could have fancy props, but that would change the show, right? It wouldn't be the show I'm doing.
You're wearing plaid right now. So,
I am wearing plaid right now. Completely on brand.
Nailing it. Yeah. On that same note, I love that you mentioned that you kind of following the things that really interest you, which is comedy and magic and sleight of hand magic, right? And one of the things that really excites me is that magicians who have been doing their same act for a long time are still like obsessed with magic and learning new tricks and, like learning fun stuff and still kind of exploring different magic. And I'm sure that maybe has been a fun little break for you in the last year or so.
Yeah. It's been a hard break for me.
Yeah,
to be honest, it's just, I love working so much. And so let me add one other thing to the things I love. I love magic, and I love, sleight of hand magic, and I love comedy. And I also love, the other thing that I love that's in my act is genuine audience interaction, right? Dealing with that person on stage as not just a prop, but as another human being, and becoming their friend and the friend of the audience as the show progresses, and interacting genuinely with the audience and reacting to what they say or laugh at or whatever. I really love that. I got sidetracked. I don't even remember what you even asked me.
Who cares? I think we were kind of talking a little bit about COVID, but I think
So I was talking about how sad I am not to work, and and you're talking about. Magic is my hobby too. It's not just my profession; it's my hobby. I really like reading about magic stuff that I'm never ever gonna do. But I also like reading about the history of magic and all those things. I think feed who I am, and who I am is what I'm trying to get across to the audience, right? When COVID first started, I thought I was going to have a couple of weeks off, and then I'd go back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is great. A couple of weeks off is good. And then it just drug on, and and so now I have days where rough, right? I really, I want to be working, and I'm so, I know I don't have it as rough as people who have, have actually lost their jobs. Hopefully, my job is still there when I am able to go back and do it. I don't want to say that, I have it rougher than anybody, because I'm the luckiest son of a bitch on earth, really. But I really do miss my job, and I really do miss working, and I can't wait to go back when it's possible to do it safely.
Absolutely. And I feel I definitely miss live performing and the live energy there.
It's just nuts. It's just nuts.
It's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about bringing sleight of hand to the stage. I think that there's a lot of it's very difficult to do, and I think that one of the biggest things that we see the experts doing when they bring sleight of hand to the stage is highlighting the audience members.
Yeah.
Is that's kind of the only way to get somebody to appreciate what's going on. What kind of advice, aside from highlighting the audience members, or maybe other tips for doing that, but what kind of advice can you give magicians who are trying to articulate, sleight of hand, but to a bigger group than, 20 or so people that could see it?
Yeah. I think what you said is right on. Many people before me did aerial fishing, and they would catch a fish and drop it in a fish bowl. And as far as I know, I don't know of anybody before me who dropped it into a glass. And you would think, a wine glass, and there's couple of advantages to that. If it's in the wine glass, it can't swim to the back of it and be out of view, this fish.
Right.
So it's just, so thinking about those sorts of little things make it better to have a small trick play large. But the big thing for that trick is having somebody hold that glass, right? So they're holding this glass in front of their face, right? So not only does that fish, the audience goes, that's really a fish? And then the face behind that glass registers that that's a real fish, and the audience vicariously senses that and feels it. And so that's kind of what you're talking about, right? And or if a woman's signed card jumps into my fly, if her face registers that yes, that is in fact her card, and if you see her body language and face and her, it's not just her face, but her entire body can register that and make that trick play bigger. But also, you can be bigger too, right? So it's not just the audience member on stage that helps. But for instance, like this I learned, my grandpa Elwood, one of the books he had that I was talking about was a Henry Hay book. And everybody knows, or most people know, the Amateur Magician's Handbook. That was big. That was his famous book. But the book that my grandfather had was called Learn Magic. And it was like lessons in magic. Each chapter was a new lesson. And I remember distinctly, there are two drawings. And one of them was like, all right, if you're just sitting with your friends, or if you're sitting at home and you take a coin from one hand into the other, you do it like that. So there was a drawing of this. And and in this lesson, I think he was like, on stage, you can make that play way bigger if you turn 3/4 to the audience, hold your hand up like this so they can see your entire palm, and then you put the coin in like this, and they see the entire surface of the coin and against the palm, so it sticks out more. Right. And so just thinking about those kinds of things, how to make, making your movement more broad. I used to do, and I still do, when I feel like I'm sort of getting off track, try to think about my feet during the show and concentrate on being up on my toes some and on my heels some, and spread my legs apart and put my feet together, one in front of the other, and change and just to make my movements more broad. And so if you move your feet and you think of, and you just sort of have that be your focus in your brain, it affects the rest of your body so much, turning, and it's just a weird way to think about it, but I think it can be useful.
I love that. And I think that while we're on stage with an audience member, sometimes when we're doing the same act, I loved what you said there about kind of when you get off track, trying to figure out these ways to get back on with our act. And I'll just express for myself, it's crazy how one line will work and work and work and work, and then it will stop working.
Yeah, and you go, and what the fuck? I'm not doing anything different as far as you can rememher, right? It's like,
yeah, and it sounds the same. You're doing nothing different. It's not a culturally insensitive line that changed because of a political swing or something. Nothing changes. So I'd love to know, you said like when you get off track, I would love to know what happens to you in a situation where like, you have your act, even the jokes in your act are like, in there where they're supposed to be. If something stops working or something is getting a weird reaction or whatever, how do you start fixing a problem?
Well, like I said, I have that's one of the biggest tricks kind of is thinking about my feet instead of the other stuff. Most of the stuff, the ones that get off track, right, are the ones that you've done over and over and over and over again. And you get off track and you go, wait, I don't know what happened? I don't know when I got off track. Was it just this show, or has it been going on that downslope for the past week?
Right.
And I don't really, and I didn't notice it until today. And what did I do, 2 weeks ago? And so thinking about my feet, also eye contact, it makes a difference too, so I'll start doing that too. Being more conscious of my eye contact with the person on stage with me, or eye contact with this guy in the front row, and pretend eye contact with the guy in the 10th row, and pretend eye contact with the guy in the back row. And one of the things when I go on the road, I still do a little, or I still did, 8 or 10 times a year. And if I was like in a new place, new theater, I liked going in and standing where I'm going to stand for the various things, and making sure I know how to pretend to make eye contact with the person in the back row, and pretend to make eye contact with the 6th row, and pretend to make, in the balcony, and, and so stand on the stage and pick out those particular spots where I know people are, even though I can't see them when the show's going because of the lights in my eyes. And that helps in general, but it also helps get back on track, to make that eye contact and sort of tie myself back into the present moment. Because I think part of it when I get off track is that I get complacent about, I do a lot of shows. Some
aspect.
Yeah, because some aspect. So just concentrating, on something, but not on the actual joke, but on eye contact or my feet or whatever. And people, I've had people say, well, I talk about being on stage, just go back one iteration or one question. We're talking about this, and it's like, well, that's not natural. You're right. That's not natural, but it's not natural to be up in front of people with a bunch of lights on you and a microphone. Right. So you sort of have to do what's natural for you in that particular instance, I think. And, and that is, you can make that seem to be a natural action if that's what you would do, so that people can see, so that people can observe and participate more. Also, there was something that flew in my head and then just flew right out just now.
But it is amazing. It's amazing that of the things that we're talking about, it's really interesting. We're talking about directing, how somebody visually sees something plays so much of a role in what their, reaction is. And, the internal dialogues of the performer while they're talking, while they're doing their act, having such an important, impact on the reactions of the audience. So it's amazing that, while the magic in a show can stay the same, 1 week versus another week of how a joke plays, a line plays, a section plays, something else like that could change based on a million different pieces of direction, pieces of inner monologue, different pieces like that. It could feel like a completely different show.
Yeah. And that's another thing that now that you say that another sort of getting back on track mechanism too, is like going over, that inner monologue or whatever that is that you're thinking while it's going on. I mean, and that's just also concentration. It's like, don't think about lunch that you're going to have in between shows. Think about it. It's like,
absolutely. Yeah, it is about concentration. And on that same note, about concentration, but I guess a little bit different than the note of kind of being on autopilot, is about spontaneity, which something that you've said before is this feeling of, I was there the night that this happened, or, something happening live, something feeling like it's happening in the moment. And there's kind of two questions about that I have. The first question is, how do we manufacture it? Like in reality, that does play a big role. And then, the secondary question is, in lieu of manufacturing it, we really do want it to happen. So how do we open up the space for it we do want a little bit of both. We want things to feel live that aren't, that happen every show, but also we do want to leave the audience some room. So can you give us advice about both of those things?
Man, I don't, I think you're exactly right. It's a really hard thing to do. And I think that's why a lot of people don't do it. It's really hard. And I don't know whether everybody can do it.
Mm.
I think blessed in some way with the sort of personality or the innate ability to say things that I rehearse or say things that I do 1,000, 10,000, literally 20,000 times,
Mm-hmm.
and still make it seem like the first time to people who are watching. Because I mean, one of the things that you see, like, oh, that would have been a good act or a good show if it didn't seem like that person was reciting the entire time.
Right.
And
Yep.
and I think that's just part of it is just being an actor, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's something that you can, it's like, if you're not funny, if you're not naturally funny, there are other opportunities for you to be a magician. You don't necessarily have to be a funny magician if you're not
Right.
funny. And if you just can't get past that thing that makes it seem like you're reciting, or that this show is the same as the show prior and the same as the one prior to that, I don't know how you get better. I mean, I don't have good advice for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it is being, I think, confident that no matter what happens, it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you allow yourself to be more open to those spontaneous things, because you have confidence in your ability to somehow weave that back to where you want to go, or you're just comfortable with wherever it ends up anyway. But still, I think that's a confidence issue. And I have accidents that happen in my show. There's things that happen, right, and not necessarily every show, but I'm trying to nudge the audience member on stage with me towards this without, just openly or, cueing them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's subtle things in it, so it doesn't always work. But that's another thing that keeps it fresh for me, right? I've got these things that I'm trying to do, and if I don't concentrate, none of those jokes are going to happen, and none of those
mm-hmm.
spontaneous moments are going to manifest themselves. And so that keeps it fresh for me. I don't know. That's a rambly answer to your question that I don't really have an answer to.
But I get it. And also one thing that kind of that's kind of clear, or that maybe I can try to, take from it, is that what happens is, like, let's say the show is, direct A to B, is the whole show. There are these little tiny paths that have been built over and over and over again. If the person falls for this, or bites on this, or doesn't bite on this, or this object falls, or this object doesn't fall, or, whatever the case may be, there's all these different things that may happen one night, but didn't happen 2 nights before, and won't happen 7 nights, but it has still happened 1,700 times,
right.
Over the course of the last however many years, where there are these elements of spontaneity, but you've already figured out, the best joke for
right.
that.
Yeah. And so the key is to make it seem like that's the only time it ever happened, right? That to bring back in your brain the first time it happened, right? So a lot of those things are accidents that happen, fortuitously, and got giant laughs. And now it's like, in my brain, I'm like, okay, how can I get that, try to engineer that more often? Because that's just such a nice moment. But, part of it is going back in my head to the first time it ever did happen really spontaneously, and recreating that for me and also for the people watching. And, so how did I react then genuinely, and how can I pretend to have that same genuine reaction now?
I love that, and thank you for that. I think that advice of channeling the first time it happened is a really, really good way to think about it as a performer, about trying to figure out what kind of energy to bring to that moment is kind of the reference point you have, which is the last time that it happened. I want to talk a little bit about comedy and magic. You said it earlier, which is like, if you're not funny, don't do comedy magic. That's probably not going to be a great path for you. There's other ways to do magic. But I would love to hear if there is something, either rules or concepts or whatever, that you've presented to yourself for the magic that you have, because I think that they are funny in concept, like that you're eating a guinea pig, or that to actually just even see these things, you're fishing for fish in thin air, like these concepts are funny to watch just in general, even beyond the joke. They're funny what's happening, like in general. Do you have any rules for yourself about the comedy magic, how you created the magic, how you've made the magic unique or funny in your way, or not really? It kind of has developed.
I can't think of any rules that I have, but I mean, I think, it's like, I really like magic, and I really know, it's like, I'm kind of, hey, I would like to see that trick. That would make me laugh, right, if I was in the audience. Right. So, that's a big thing for, it's like, I don't want to have anything in the show where I go, well, if I was watching that, I'd think that was stupid.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want that. It really is a personal expression, right? So it's stuff that makes me laugh. And man, it's hard to do the two together. I think there's a reason that there are more sort of, if you think of comedy magicians, where you think, okay, that guy, like if you think like Amazing Jonathan, really successful, you don't think of him as the great magician,
right?
But you think of him as really funny.
Yeah.
And there are great magicians that you just, that guy, he's not funny. And but I think the reason that there aren't too many who are trying to do what I'm trying to do is because it's a hard thing to combine those two, right? Mm-hmm. Even though, sometimes a complete and utter surprise / mystery happens, one of the natural reactions is laughter, right? It's still really hard to combine those two things. Sometimes they step on each other, right? It's like something funny happens, but then you lose
all the tension that you built for the release of a magic trick,
and you miss stuff too, right? The audience misses something, right? I was laughing, and I didn't. You can use laughter as misdirection for some secret move, but I think you can't use laughter right when some effect, the magic is supposed to happen, right? When it's like, wait, I was laughing. That's not fair. I didn't see, and it works the other way too, right? It's like, holy shit, I missed. I know there was some joke he said, but I don't know. I was so concentrating on that card in his shoe or whatever, and it's tricky to combine them. And I don't really have any rules for that, except for, like you said, ideally the idea is that the magic itself, the situations that are presented, are funny without the magic.
Right.
Just the idea of eating a guinea pig is comical. The idea of catching live fish out of the air is comical in and of itself. The idea of me tiptoeing around on stage in a yellow raincoat, is funny without the concept of the cards across trick, in there. The idea of just taking a telephone out of your shoe, even if I just did that, and the thing hadn't magically appeared, it's just such an odd thing to happen.
Right.
It's funny. So, I think ideally those are the things I'm going for, is stuff that, whether the trick was great or not, the situation would be funny.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that comedy magic, like you've touched on before, is very difficult. And I think kind of what you said there, you said it best, which is the challenge of building rhythm with comedy and then having to abandon that to build tension with magic so that the punchline of the trick cannot be stepped on, or vice versa, right? You build tension with magic and you don't step on it with the punchline of a joke, and people feel like they miss the trick, or the other way around. So I think that it is quite a challenging thing to do. And I love what you said. I think it's true that we don't see a lot of comedy magicians whose magic is actually fooling, really outstanding and fooling, and they're funny the whole time. You're laughing instead of just
yeah. And for me, that was another consequence of working in those clubs, right? Because they were comedy clubs, right? They weren't magic clubs. It's different than working at the Magic Castle or the Comedy Magic Club in Hermosa Beach, California, or a lot of magic venues have been springing up around, or have been springing up around the country. But in a comedy club environment, a lot of times, I mean, the person who's in charge of the show, the manager of the club, is not even in the room, right? And so if she's like in her office ordering beer or counting money or whatever, all she knows about the show is what the staff says. But even more importantly, really, is what she can hear, right, while she's tallying up the week's take, and if she hears a laugh and a laugh and a laugh, back to back to back to back to back, if the laughs come pretty regularly and quickly, I really, especially then when I was working those clubs, I was really concerned about laughs per minute.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
and trying to really, beef that up. And so that was really good for me, I think, having that sort of pressure, I guess.
Do you think that now, I know things are a little bit different, I guess, again, now you can put in air quotes, but do you think that for a magician to think seriously about laughs per minute, a comedy magician, is a good way to go? Do you think that's a good approach?
Oh my God, I think it's fantastic. But I think, I was talking with, do you know Nick DeFat?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I was talking with Nick, and he and I are pretty good buddies. And, we were talking about when I was in those clubs, when I was working those clubs, there was me and there was Michael Finney, and there was early on Harry Anderson and Amazing Jonathan and guys. There were, at least a dozen people working those clubs, those comedy magicians. And now I don't know of any who are making that their market. And I don't understand. I don't know why that is. Maybe those clubs just aren't as open to it as they used to be. But it seems like that would be if I was working, I would really be trying to get in those clubs. But who knows what I would be doing if I was 20.
Who knows? Speaking of the times, everything going on right now, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of the positive side, or at least kind of what you've been up to, this last year. It literally is the 1-year anniversary of the most drastic change in your life. You've been doing shows 20 years at Harrah's, but however many years previously, with not a break that's ever looked anything else like this. So can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. I was saying early on in the pandemic, 2 months in, I was going, this is nuts. 2 months without a show. 2 months. That's the longest I've gone since I was 8 years old without doing a show for people. It's crazy. And now it's a year. And that's just, you're right. It's the biggest thing. It's the most incredible event that's ever happened to me in my whole life. Other than birth of a daughter and married my wife. Just get that in there.
Make sure to get those in there. In case they listen. Who knows? They sometimes listen.
One of the things that I miss, one of the other things I miss besides working, is we had a weekly croquet match in my backyard. Sometimes more than that, but at least once a week. The cast of characters who would rotate through is me, a guy named Vinny Grasso, Jason England, gambling card guy, Nick DeFat, a guy named Jacob Jacks, who you might not know. I don't know. Jacob is a street performer here in Las Vegas, really great, funny. And Michael Godot, who's a juggler, was in the Lance Burton show for years and years and years. And so between 4 and 6 of us, at least once a week, would gather, have dinner and pie and play croquet in my backyard. And croquet sounds like just the goofiest game, but it's really, if you'd see it, there's way more strategy than you would think. Bill Smith, there's way more strategy, and it's way more difficult, and it's really a fun game because it also allows you plenty of time to, make fun of each other and tell jokes and, share, hey, did you guys see this video or whatever? There's lots of that. And so, and we usually play at night in Las Vegas. It's hot during the day and I'm working during the day. And so we play a game, have dinner, play another game, have pie, and then hang out. So, but it's just, it's just us ragging on each other and trying to make each other laugh.
Yeah.
COVID said, hey, no more backyard gatherings, right? Can't touch each other's balls or mallets. And so then a few of us discovered the Oculus, the virtual reality headset,
VR.
And they don't have croquet for that, but they do have miniature golf.
Close enough.
And it's pretty great. So we started doing that.
Oh, that's epic.
It was so it was fantastic. We enjoyed ourselves. Again, you see some avatar head, but you can see each other's putters and balls, and you're experiencing this miniature golf course together, and you can talk in real time wherever you are around the world. And so that sort of scratched that itch for all of us. And we're having a great time doing it. And so, I don't know, I got in my head that, hey, I think if people knew that we were doing this, they would really enjoy hanging out with us.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we do that? You can only have 5 people on this miniature golf game. So we started like a video talk show. It's on YouTube. It's called Don't Everybody Leave. And we've shot, I don't know, a number of episodes. We've released 6 so far. First week we released 3 in a row, one Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday or something. And then now every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, there's a new episode. And so it's me, it's some of those guys, not all of them, but me, Vinny Grasso, Jacob Jacks, Michael Godot, Jason England, Nick DeFat. Did I say that? So there's 6 of us. And then so I come on, talk for a minute, and then bring out the other 5 guys, and we talk for 10 or 15 minutes. And then we have a guest who comes on, and we talk to the guest, and it's about an hour or so. We usually shoot like an hour and 10 minutes and make it an hour, after we edit it up a little bit. And we're not doing too much. We're not doing tricks, although Handsome Jack was one of the guests, and he did do a trick. This last one that we released, episode 6, was a guy named Earl Turner, who's a singer here in town, and he played guitar and sang a little bit. But we're mostly still just trying to make each other laugh and make fun of each other. And have people hang out with us.
First of all, I think that's epic, and I'm really, really excited about that. And I got a chance to watch some of it, and they are super funny. They're a real blast, and people should definitely go check out Don't Everybody Leave. And on that same note, as a lot of things have changed, one strange thing that changes is that somebody who is prolific for in-person and live entertainment is now, I think, probably for the very first time, dipping their foot in the water of like online regular content creation, which is a really interesting world for you to enter. How do you feel about it? Have you liked it? Has it been interesting for you? What's it been like to tap into the internet in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a lifesaver for me, being able to hang out with my buddies, and get that same, it's slightly different than being in my backyard, and over the course of an evening. I mean, we usually start around 5:30, and we would sometimes play until midnight. So it's not quite as epic as that, but it really does. It really does. I put my toe into virtual shows too, magic shows, for a little while. I did a few of those, public shows, and I've done a couple of corporate shows, and I'm sort of putting my toe back in that market a little bit, but it wasn't satisfying, in the way that, it didn't scratch my performing itch the way this talk show scratches my hanging out with my buddies itch.
Yeah. It's funny. I found a lot of joy in virtual magic. I've really, really, really loved it. I think it's been super cool. And it is definitely not the same as in person, but there are some really interesting benefits that you get. And one that just I love, I think is maybe like relevant to share. When somebody comes to your show or goes to a theater and you see them, all the information you have about them is either what they're wearing, or maybe something you've seen before the show, or the way they interact with you. In a virtual show, you quite literally see into people's homes, and you see a lot of what's going on. So especially for somebody who does a little bit of crowd work, or at least is interactive with the people there, that may be a fun benefit for you to play with, that I know we absolutely love, because it's just so much fun to be able to see people's homes and make a lot of crazy material and roast.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't really thought about. I'm glad you said that, because I mean, the way the show that I put together was structured, I wasn't really seeing a big gallery view or whatever. I wasn't seeing a bunch of people, because I was really concentrating on.
I urge you, if you're going to play with virtual, to play with being able to see the gallery, because if you see the gallery, you can see reactions. And even though it's a half a second delay, it's the same thing. No, it is. It's the same thing, right? So do whatever you can. And if you need any help getting stuff set up, like, just let me know. I'm sure you have pretty talented people around you, but definitely getting the gallery mode in front of you is a key to being able to kind of have that feeling that live interaction feels a little bit, and not feel like you're talking to yourself in a room, and just right. I totally get that. We are kind of coming around to the end of the episode, and there's a few different questions that we ask at the end of every episode. The first is the endless chain. So in order to keep this podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be a perfect addition to this podcast. So who do you think would be a phenomenal recommendation to be on this podcast?
Oh, Lord. I think I should tell you somebody that I don't like, just to make their lives miserable. I mean, this guy that I was saying, Jacob Jacks, that no one's heard of.
Yep.
He's a street performer here in Las Vegas. He's a really good magician. He's really funny. And he's articulate. He can talk about magic in a pretty smart way. I think and nobody knows who he is at all. I mean, he's just unknown.
That's a great one. That'll be perfect. Thank you for that. The next thing is about modern magic. A lot has changed in the world of magic in the last year, even few years, but in the last year, a lot has changed in magic. What's one thing going on in magic right now that you like, and one thing in magic that you don't like?
One thing I like is, there's been a call around the world, I think, for more diversity in every profession and every walk of life. And I think magic is maybe a little behind that, but is catching up. And I think that I like that quite a bit. When I think about the stuff that I don't like, one of the things that pops into my head is something that we talked about before, is or this is more of a disappointment than something I don't like, maybe. I disappointed that there aren't more people doing what I do, more 17, 18-year-olds who express interest in stand-up comedy magic. But, maybe that's good. Maybe the less people, better for me.
If you were to have a hunch as to why that is, what would you suggest?
That's a good question. Maybe there aren't as many places to work as there used to be for that kind of act. But also maybe because there's more of this, right? There's more internet stuff where you can perform and get your validation. Really, part of it for me, especially when I was younger, is I really like getting in front of people and having them laugh and applaud at what I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it spurred me on. And I think now more people are spurred on by thumbs up and positive comments on their TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And so so that's just a venue that wasn't open to me, and maybe
who knows? Maybe the
because that exists. Maybe that's enough for people.
Yeah, maybe the comedy magicians are hiding on TikTok.
Maybe
that's where they all are. The next thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for a while now. We've talked about a whole bunch of different aspects. If someone's going to think back to this episode and hopefully remember one thing or really internalize one thing, what do you hope that one thing is for a magician listening to this?
One thing that we didn't talk about that I think is important for becoming a better performer is being a good listener. And to me, that's, that chief piece of advice is always do more shows. But a corollary is, be a good listener. And, I think that helps you off stage and in your real life too. But on stage, I think it really, you're talking about that earlier. We were talking about spontaneity. I mean, being a good listener ties into all of those things, right? You're genuinely listening to the person on stage with you, and that allows you to be more open to the spontaneity because you're actually listening to them, or you're listening to the audience. But also, you're listening to yourself, right? You've got that little voice inside your head while the show's going on and after the show is over, and you're listening to your friends who tell you yes or no, or this looked like shit or whatever. So I think that's the do shows, right up there is be a good listener.
I think that's such a great, last piece of advice for people who are listening to this is that, do shows. And it's funny that you mention, here and in other places that the advice of what should I do to be a better magician? It's do shows, it's not super complicated. And it's funny, as somebody who interviews magicians, it came to a certain number of interviews where I was like, why am I still doing this? They're all just giving me the same advice, which is just to do more shows.
I mean, if you look at the evidence, who's the most successful magician of all time? Who's done the most shows of all time? David Copperfield, right? Who's next? Penn and Teller probably done the second most shows.
Right.
And then maybe Lance Burton. It's those three are right up there. Is at least in the U.S., those three performers have done the most shows, and they're and so, I mean, and you could argue, well, they've done the most shows because they're the best magicians, but I think it's the other way around.
You know what? I think you might be right. And I think it is very funny that, the all advice of all of magic can be summed up in do more shows, but I think the corollary that you said there of, and listen is enough that, if you go at it with your magic knowledge, you keep trying new things and you keep performing, keep doing new shows and listen. and it'll make it better. So thank you so much for that. The last piece is plug. So where can people find you on the internet if they want to check you out right now, if they want to see what's going on, maybe when the shows are live, if they are live, where can people follow and see what's going on in your world?
You can go to mackingshow.com. That's a website, but more up-to-date stuff is at Mac King Show. MACKINGSHOW on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So
perfect. And definitely everybody go check out Don't Everybody Leave.
Yeah, Don't Everybody Leave. It's on YouTube every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. New ones are released. And so I think the next one is going to be Lance Burton, but I don't, it depends. We have a few already shot. And so it depends on, he had some internet trouble, so we might, he's in the middle of nowhere right now. So we may reshoot his, but we've got to, there'll be a new one. But watch the past ones. If you haven't watched all the 6 ones that have been released, they're all fantastic, I think. And they just we get better at it. It's hard, as I'm sure from doing this, it's hard to not talk over each other and to step on each other's jokes. And when there are 6 of you, and sometimes in 7 with the guest, it gets even more complicated. But we're getting better at it, and I think I think people would enjoy hanging out with us. I think there's a lot of laughs.
Absolutely, and I'll just share as well. I find that the people who like listening to long form audio conversations of magicians talking, those are people that would generally like this sort of thing. So if you're listening to this right now and you like this kind of thing, definitely doing it with people that are funny was probably better. So definitely go check out Don't Everybody Leave.
I swear I'm way more funnier on Don't Everybody Leave than I have been on your show.
You've been pretty funny. This has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much. Thank you for the laughs and thank you for the good times. And this has been awesome. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if you thought this was cool or interesting, or you fancy somebody listening to it, then spread the word and tell a friend. It means the world, and it's the only way that people hear about it. Podcasts are weird. It's not like videos. They don't go viral. You don't hear of podcasts going viral. That's because it's usually just a friend who tells a friend who tells a friend, which means if you think somebody else should hear this, it would mean the world if you told a friend. That's it. Thanks for being here. I'll see you all next Thursday. Peace.